Did you know that Scotland has over 1,500 castles? That's more castles per square mile than anywhere else in the world. Today, Jon and I are going to share our top 5 must-see castles in Scotland. Each castle has its own unique story, stunning architecture, and breathtaking locations.
Please stay till the end because we're going to reveal our absolute favorite castle in Scotland. All right, so the first castle we want to talk about today is actually a very historic castle. It sits right in the heart of Edinburgh. It's actually Edinburgh Castle. And so it's actually perched on volcanic rock, which is called Castle Rock. It dominates the Edinburgh skyline for sure. And it's actually part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah, so we're going to share 3 key facts about Edinburgh Castle with you today. And the first one is that it is one of the oldest fortified places in Europe. Castle Rock has been occupied since at least the Iron Age, but back in like 900 BC. So that's a long time ago. And the Iron Age people built it on that hill there, which was a strategic military location perched high on that volcanic rock. And the first castle was actually built in the 11th century during the reign of Malcolm III. And another interesting fact is that Edinburgh has been besieged more than any other castle in Europe.
Yeah. So the next fact we want to share with you is it's actually home to Scotland's crown jewels. It houses, one of Scotland's oldest crown jewels, and it includes the crown, scepter, and actual sword of state. And, I think in the early 1800s, Sir Walter Scott rediscovered them. They were sealed in a room that they thought had been lost since the early 1700s. It also houses the Stone of Scone, which is also called the Stone of Destiny, and it was returned to Scotland in 1996. And the same stone which has been used for coronations of Scottish monarchs for centuries.
Yeah, and the third fact we want to share about Edinburgh Castle is it's still an active military base. It's one of the few ancient castles in Britain that still has a military garrison there. And they have the 1 o'clock gun that is fired every day except for Sunday. And that's been a tradition there since 1861. They also host the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo every August on the castle esplanade.
Yeah, and so, actually my favorite part of this castle was the actual Great Hall. It has really impressive medieval ceiling. It's just an impressive hall. When you walk in there, it's just stunning. And it was built in 1511 for King James IV, and where they've had like grand banquets, state events were held. Standing in there, you can't just imagine the history that unfolded, within those walls. It's breathtaking when you walk in there. I just loved it. All kinds of military historical memorabilia, which was actually my favorite part for sure.
Yeah, and my favorite part was actually the view from Edinburgh Castle walls, the battlements up there, just absolutely breathtaking. You could see the entire city of Edinburgh, surrounding the castle, and it was just a fantastic view. Mm-hmm. So the second must-see castle in Scotland is Eilean Donan Castle. So Eilean Donan is perched on a small tidal island at the confluence of 3 sea lochs. It is one of the most breathtaking castles you'll ever see, one of the most photographed. It's in the Western Highlands, and it's about 8 miles from the gateway of Isle of Skye.
Mm-hmm. So the first fact we want to share with you about this castle, it was actually named after a 6th century Irish saint. Eilean Donan means Island of Donan, named after Bishop Donan, who came to Scotland around 580 AD. Saint Donan was actually martyred in 617 AD. And it was actually the first fortified castle built in the 13th century to defend against Viking raids.
All right, the second fact that we'd like to share with you about Eilean Donan is that it was destroyed and rebuilt after the Jacobite Rising. In 1719, the castle was garrisoned by 46 Spanish soldiers supporting the Jacobites, and the English government sent 3 frigates that bombarded the castle for 3 days. The government troops discovered like over 300 barrels of gunpowder, which was used to blow up the castle. And so it lay in ruins for nearly 200 years. And then the island was bought back in 1911. And the person who bought it, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae Gilstrap, spent 20 years reconstructing it. And it was open to the public in 1955, and it's been open to the public since then.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I remember about that castle is they have a really unique kind of display of showing that really discusses the gunpowder and all that that was used there, and so it's really interesting to hear that story for sure. So the third fact we want to share about the castle is it's actually a famous filming location. It's been featured in multiple films. Highlander, from like the mid 80s, the movie. It actually appeared in a James Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, and as the MI6 headquarters in Scotland. So it's been on countless TV shows, commercials, fairly certain. It's, like Katrina said before, it's one of the most photographed castles anywhere in the world, really. And so once you've seen it, everybody, you recognize it right away for sure. So.
Yeah, and it was really cool that we've seen images of it multiple times in our life. It's one of the things that comes to mind when you think of Scottish castles, and it was just amazing to be there. And I think my favorite part of the castle was the stone footbridge that walked over to the castle with the tides. The tide was out whenever we first visited it. The second time, the tide was in. So it was just really cool to see the difference in the tides and how it transformed the castle. But it was just stunning walking across that footbridge and seeing the beautiful, picturesque Eilean Donan Castle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for me, one of my favorite parts was the banquet hall. It had these beautiful wooden ceilings. I think they said they were made from Douglas fir that was imported from Canada and British Columbia, which was crazy to think about, but that was done actually as a restoration to the castle. And then the thick walls, just these thick stone walls, and these little tiny windows that you could look out of really gave you a real sense of what a medieval castle was like. And so I think for me that was actually my favorite part. So the third castle we want to talk about is Stirling Castle. This castle is also perched on a volcanic rock, which is called Castle Hill, which sits in the town of Stirling. It held a very strategic location back in the day. It was basically controlled the route between the lowlands and highlands there in Scotland. It overlooks the site of two major Scottish battles, Stirling Bridge in the late 1200s and I'm sorry if I butcher this, Bannockburn in 1314.
Yeah. So next we're going to share some key facts about Stirling Castle. The first one I want to share is that it played a key role in the wars of Scottish independence. So it changed hands multiple times between the Scots and the English during the War of Independence, or the Wars of Independence, and William Wallace won the Battle of Stirling in 1297 nearby. It was a historic moment. There's actually a monument, the Wallace Monument, that you can see from the castle, from the castle walls. And Robert the Bruce also had a victory there with that Battle of Bannockburn, thank you, in the 1300s. So whoever held Stirling Castle controlled Scotland. It was that strategically important.
Yeah. So the next fact we want to share with you about Stirling Castle, it was just a magnificent Renaissance palace. It was one of the finest buildings in Britain. It was lavishly decorated during the reign of King James IV and James V during the 15th and 16th centuries. The Great Hall is one of the largest medieval banquet halls ever built in Scotland. The royal palace has been, restored with vibrant colors, tapestries, and period furnishings for sure. And it really gives you a good sense of royal splendor, in the Scottish Renaissance for sure.
100%. And the third fact that we wanted to share is that it was actually the childhood home of Mary, Queen of Scots. And she was actually crowned there as an infant in 1543. And she spent much of her childhood at Stirling Castle. And there's a strong connection to the Stuart family and the Stuart dynasty.
Yeah, and that was incredible. That was one of the things I remember about that when I heard that, it was Mary Queen of Scots. A lot of people, that when you hear that name, it kind of rings a bell with from history class and all that back in the day. And so it was incredible just, walking and experiencing that type of history for sure.
So my favorite part of Stirling Castle was definitely the absolute splendor of the castle. The colors are so vibrant. There's deep purples and reds, and there's unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was their, I don't know, was it their family? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm messing
Family
that up.
crest.
Yeah. So, but ever since I was a little girl, I've loved unicorns. So I was in love with Stirling Castle as soon as I saw all the unicorns. But then they have these ceilings that are carved. It's called the Stirling heads, and it's carved of oak medallions, and it's just absolutely stunning, beautiful.
Yeah.
My favorite parts of that castle for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so for me, I think my favorite part was just the views, from the castle walls. You can see for miles across the countryside, Highlands. You look out one side, you have Highlands, Lowlands on the other. You can see the William Wallace Monument. You can see the site of Bannockburn. So for me, it was just incredible being able to see all this, historic places and battle sites, there in Scotland for sure.
Yeah. So the fourth must-see castle in Scotland is Urquhart Castle. It is a dramatic location on the banks of Loch Ness, the famous Loch Ness, right? It's near Inverness, and it overlooks like the deepest part of Loch Ness. So, and the castle is a mostly intact ruins.
So the first fact we want to share with you is that the castle has over 1,000 years of fortifications completed on it. So it was actually the site itself was fortified as early as the 6th century. That's crazy to think about for sure. The present castle dates from anywhere between the 13th and 16th centuries. It's one of the largest castles in Scotland, during medieval times, and it was actually really strategically important because it controlled the Great Glen.
Yeah, and so fact number 2 is that it actually had a really violent and turbulent history. It changed hands many times, just like Stirling Castle, between the Scots and the Brits during the Wars of Independence, and it was subject to constant raids and clan warfare. In 1692, it actually was blown up. There seems to be a theme there of blowing up castles. It was blown up by government forces to prevent it from being used by the Jacobites. But it was left as a picturesque ruin now and never rebuilt.
Yeah. And the third fact we want to share with you is it's actually one of the most visited castles in Scotland. It sits on a stunning location, like Katrina said, right there on Loch Ness, which makes it incredibly, photographic, photogenic. It's a perfect spot for watching, looking out for the Loch Ness monster, if you're into that, which, there's been many sightings over the years, I guess, supposedly. So we didn't see it.
We didn't see Nessie.
Yeah. We were looking, but we didn't see him. And the visitor center actually has some excellent exhibits and some history on the castle itself and what it was, its history and what it was like actually during medieval times. And Grant Tower actually offers some really panoramic views of Loch Ness for sure.
Yeah, I think that was actually my favorite part of Urquhart Castle was that climbing to the top of Grant Tower and looking out over Loch Ness. It was really unforgettable.
Yeah.
You can see why people report seeing the Loch Ness monster there.
Yeah,
and I also have to say we got very fortunate. It was a beautiful day. It was just the weather was gorgeous. The green grass, the beautiful loch, the beautiful ruins. It was a gorgeous day for us.
Actually, our whole trip we were really lucky with the weather for our whole trip in Scotland for sure. So, but I think for the castle itself, my favorite part was just the setting. It was just beautiful. The ruins rising, above the Loch Ness itself. You saw the Highlands in the background. It's just that when you think of a Scottish Highland scene, that's kind of what you're thinking about, the picture you might have in your mind. We spent hours just walking around. There's all kinds of trails and different, historical markers around the ruins itself that really, kind of bring you into what life was like during those times. So our fifth must-see castle is Balmoral Castle. This castle was stunning. It actually, is in the Scottish Highlands. It sits on the banks of the River Dee. It's just surrounded by just beautiful scenery. You have forests, you have mountains, just a beautiful setting.
It is, yeah. And so the first fact that we want to share with you about Balmoral Castle is that it is the beloved residence, private residence of the royal family. And it was originally, the land was purchased by Prince Albert for his queen, Queen Victoria, in 1852 for his wife there.
Mm-hmm.
And Victoria fell in love with the Scottish Highlands, and actually the royal family continues to spend, I think, every August through October there every year. Queen Elizabeth loved it. She spent many summers there, and it was her favorite residence by far. And King Charles III continues that tradition.
Mm-hmm. So the second fact we want to share with you is the castle itself was actually built in Scottish baronial architecture. So Prince Albert commissioned the current castle in 1853, and it was built from local granite, in the Scottish baronial style. It features, towers, turrets, gables. And it's set in a 50,000 acre estate with gardens, forest, and farmland. There's just, the beautiful gardens themselves were designed by Prince Albert.
And I'll just have to add to that with the towers and the turrets. It's a very different castle from any of the other castles that we visited in Scotland. It with that granite, it was a lighter color, but it was very like fairy tale, like with the turrets and things like that.
So, yeah, it made it seem maybe didn't look quite as medieval, I guess. It was more of a baronial
yeah.
style, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
All right. And fact number 3 is that it has limited public access. So the castle itself is still private. It's not, the whole castle is not open to the public, especially none of it's open to the public when the royal family is in residence. But the ballroom and the grounds are open to visitors April through July. And we actually visited in May. So it was perfect timing for us. And we got to visit the ballroom. And it has actually exhibits, an exhibition of the royal family life and history. So that was really fascinating to explore. And it has extensive grounds, gardens, and the grounds were just pretty spectacular.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess my favorite part was, the ballroom itself. Like Katrina said, the ballroom just has all of these, personal items, historical items, tartans, family crests, just all of this historical, important information that's been passed down, from the royal family through the years. And it was just really interesting to see those historical artifacts and just really kind of learn the history of the royal family, for sure.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to stand there and think, I'm standing where kings and queens have danced. It was just an amazing experience to do that. I think my favorite part was the gardens, and really the forest around it, just walking up through the area, just beautiful trees and mountains. I can see why it was one of their favorite places, because the Scottish Highlands are gorgeous.
Right.
All right, so those are all 5 of our must-see castles in Scotland. And now for us to reveal which one was our favorite, drum roll. So our favorite was Stirling Castle. Yeah, I'll say I absolutely loved the architecture and the beautiful colors and tapestry and the woodwork. And really, it just made you feel like you were walking in that Renaissance era and understanding what life was like every day. It was very focused on the daily life in the castle, rather than just all the wars and all that type of history, which can be interesting. But I found it fascinating to see what daily life was like during that time period, and just such a stunning architectural setting.
Yeah, and for me, it was definitely the views from the castle itself, like we talked about before. You just had these, you're looking out. You have the Highlands on one side of the castle, you have the lowlands on the other. It just held such a significant, strategic location, for there in Scotland, and just looking out on the William Wallace Monument, looking out on some of the historic battlefields, things like that was just, for me being a history buff, like I said before, was just incredible. And then just, there, the town of Stirling itself, where it sits, was just incredible to me as well. The only thing that, regret that we had is it was actually raining at the time, and we got there a little bit late in the day. And so we only had really about 45 minutes to really explore the castle. And so we definitely want to go back at some point.
We will go back.
We will. And so we'll have some more time to visit and really explore, like we really want to. But absolutely, this was our favorite castle, hands down.
Yeah. So there you have it, our 5 must-see Scottish castles, and each one gave us a different window into Scotland's rich history.
Yeah, and so, from the royal residences that we talked about to some of the more medieval castles and fortresses, Scotland's castles are just truly world-class for sure.
Yeah, so we would love to hear which one you would choose. Which one sounds like the most fascinating for you that you would like to visit? I would recommend visiting all 5, but yeah, tell us which one is your favorite. Which one would you want to put on the top of your list for castles to visit? And if you've been there before, tell us which one is your favorite, or tell us another castle that you have visited that would make your top 5 list. Like we said in the beginning, there are over 1,500 castles in Scotland, so you're not going to run out of castles to see when you visit there.
So if you're planning a trip to Scotland, which I very much encourage you to do if you can, or just, looking at different destinations, retirement adventures, things like that, please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your comments, any suggestions you have. So,
yeah. All right. So I'm Katrina.
And I'm Jon. We'll see you on the trail.